Hey, thank you for joining us on the next episode of the Summit Series. In this episode, myself and Dan met with Alana Brittain. Alana is the Head of Strategic and Enterprise LinkedIn Sales Solutions for APAC. This was a great conversation and we covered a lot of different topics, but to give you a wee flavour of what we spoke about, we discussed Alana's career, we discussed some of the challenges or learnings and mistakes that Alana has made, and I think a lot of people will get value from the approach that Alana took in terms of to correct them. Also, we spoke about generative AI and how that is being sort of implemented into the LinkedIn product, but also more broadly, what we really should be thinking about from a Gen AI perspective. Really fascinating to hear some of the stats and things that Alana went into. And we also spoke about Alana's leadership philosophy, exceptional amounts of EQ and the way that she leads teams and empowers them and gets the best out of them. I think you'll get a lot of value from. I really hope you enjoy this episode as much as Dan and I enjoyed having Alana on the show. Please enjoy myself, Dan, and Alana. All right, fantastic. Well, Alana, yes. Thank you so much for joining Dan and I. It's great to see you.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited to talk through lots of different areas, but we will start where we start with every conversation, which is what are some of your earliest experiences that have shaped you to be the leader and the person that you are today?
It's a great question. I can think of a few, but I always come back to the experience of joining LinkedIn because it was my biggest leadership failure and my most transformative leadership lesson as a result. So just to give you a bit of context, I came into LinkedIn in 2018 and I inherited an existing team and I was really keen to prove myself and hit the ground running. So I came in with a strong operational background and I was trying to drive for results. I made some very quick changes. But here's the thing, you can't have an impact on others or get them to change if you don't establish a true connection to them. And so once I tried to introduce these changes, I got absolutely slammed. I think I had 3 surveys done on me in a couple of months, which was just very unfortunate timing. And the rhetoric in the surveys, it's burned into my brain. Things like poor EQ, she treats us like a number, she doesn't know us very well. And so I'm not ashamed to admit, I think I was broken for a short while after receiving all this feedback, but I had to force myself to accept something that I previously never believed in, which was you do yourself a disservice when you try to disconnect your personal life with your business life, because you're managing human beings and humans are motivated by personal experiences. And so I made a big blunder there, but very thankful for the lesson. And I certainly haven't made this mistake again because I learned a couple of things. One, it's a strength to show vulnerability. I think that is the glue that binds your team culturally. Fundamentally, I believe in this. The second, and then probably the most important, is it doesn't matter what you believe yourself to be. It doesn't matter who you think you are or what values you have. What matters is how that shows up to other people and how you impact them and their experience of you. And so I had to remind myself of that because I think in the nighttime, I was like, I'm a good person. I do care about people. But that wasn't coming through. And so if there is a disconnect between who you think you are and how others are perceiving you, then you've got to work really hard as a leader to bridge the gap. And then I honestly believe if you really hire talented individuals who are incredible in what they do, your job as a leader is to foster connection, build a culture that's strong, and it will pay you back in spades if you can foster that shared sense of goal, that shared sense of what they believe in, that shared sense of identity. Then it will pay you back because the sense of connectedness and the efficiency you get from that is amazing. But more importantly, the workplace becomes a fun place to be and the team becomes a fun team to lead. So big lesson there, learnt it hard and fast. And I have to say, I'm very thankful for it. But at the time, I probably wasn't. But I certainly am now.
What were some of the things that you put in place or changed then specifically? So when you had that eureka moment, because that would break a lot of people and a lot of people would probably leave, right? So how did you overcome that? What were some of the things that you did?
I certainly thought about leaving in the first couple of months. And I can say this now, having been at the company for 6 years. So I didn't leave, thankfully. But the things that I did, so I sought advice from many people who knew me well and cared about me. And one of the things that came out was, you need to work really hard to try and establish what your team is about. Because whilst you've inherited a team that exists, they have their own identity right now, and you're not in there at all. And so what I have learned to do, and I do it every 6 months officially in terms of team vision and mission sessions. So I get the team together, we talk about who we want to be, what are our shared values, where do we differ, where are we the same? Like what connects us from a value standpoint and where are we sort of a little bit different, and we learn to embrace that. And then what are we trying to achieve and what behaviors do we need to set to do that for the year? So I do that every 6 months to a year. And then in between that, I pepper a lot of what I would call vulnerability sessions, but basically discussing deeper issues that connect us on a personal level, whether it's diversity, inclusion, belonging issues, or something that's happening in the world currently that we all want to discuss, because I just think that, again, it's just reinforcing that connection between the individuals, because whilst we are a team, we're also, I lead a sales team, so it's individual contributors, but the fact that you can connect everyone personally means that they go above and beyond for each other. And that's a hugely valuable thing as a leader for morale and for performance as well.
I would imagine maybe the philosophies that you're talking about would map into your sales philosophy. Does it cross over? And is that something that you work with the team on?
You mean the idea of sort of selling as a team and helping? Is that what you sort of mean?
Yeah, or maybe the values and things and the mission. How does that kind of stitch in, I guess, with the work when you're in front of a customer and building relationships with them and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a underlying belief in how we sell at LinkedIn, which is one that is integrous and then one that is customer focused. And I think if those values don't come out in our vision and mission, then I've probably done a bad job in hiring, because that's what I try and vet through when I'm assessing candidates. It's like, what do you truly believe about selling? Where do you get the energy from? Because salespeople, there's huge variance in a salesperson in the market. And the type of person that I'm looking for is someone who really cares about finding problems and helping co-create a solution with the customer, someone who's very passionate about the product and evangelizes the product because they believe it makes a huge difference. And if you lead with that care and that customer focus, then culturally, I think that does come out in all our vision and mission sessions, but also how we turn up to our clients. So there is a lot of crossover there, but I think also just being at a company like LinkedIn, members first is one of our values. Integrity is one of our values. So there's certainly themes that always come up anyway, regardless, when you're doing these kind of brainstorming sessions on who are we as a team and what is our identity.
I'm always fascinated by the different philosophies around sales, I think. And why do you think that philosophy that you're talking about, that mission and vision, the care for customers and co-creating solutions and identifying problems with them, why do you think, or what's happened over your career maybe to tell you that that's an effective way to sell?
Yeah, I just think that sales is not transactional. The value you add as a salesperson is obviously your deep experience and knowledge in your product set, but also your ability to assess a client from the outside in, and find a connection that maybe they can't even see themselves because of your expertise. As I said, there's many different ways to sell, and there's variance around, the car salesperson right up to an enterprise seller. But it's a small world. It's a connected world. It's a world where if you do a disservice to someone, it will be amplified, much like if you do a great service or if you are a great addition to someone in terms of a salesperson, that will be amplified. And so your reputation follows you wherever you go in the market. And I think, we've done some research recently that people return to salespeople even if they move companies because there's trust there and there's a relationship. And so I think sales is much more about relationships now than it has ever been, as well as expertise in what you're doing. But I think like that trusted relationship is becoming even more important as we enter into the idea of cross-border selling and digital selling and selling without even meeting people face to face. Being able to have that credibility is really important.
Something that we've spoken about before, Alana, is around your hiring strategy and what you look for when you're hiring. So I speak to companies all the time in the SaaS world, and it's like they must have SaaS experience. They must have X amount of experience coming from this world. I know you feel very differently about that, but what would you say are the unfair advantages or the superpowers, if you like, that you get from hiring outside of that? And why did you make that decision?
Some of my best hires have been people who have not come from SaaS. I have to say that straight up because it's so true. One of my reps a couple of years ago, they're still at LinkedIn. They came from the video, so Val Morgan sort of territory, completely different sort of skill set, well, not a different skill set, a different industry experience and job title. And more recently, I hired a woman who came from selling, nav track technology to trucking and logistics and had never sold SaaS or enterprise sales. But what I look for in the interview is breaking it down into transferable skills. And so things that I look for, obviously in sales, I look for grit. Resilience and grit is one of the things that I ask a lot about, and I ask about their sort of grit story. And true to my word about being vulnerable, a lot of that normally comes out of the interview and sometimes we cry. But it does give you a good idea of how people have faced adversity in their life and how they get through that, because in sales, you do find that you get a lot of no's and you get a lot of pushback. And so the ability to take your wins as you get it, to keep pressing on is really, really important. So I look for that, but I also look for things like in both of those examples, the Val Morgan example and the Teletrack sort of logistics software example, they were exhibiting qualities that were incredible, prioritization, customer lens, like being able to solution sell. These were all coming out in the examples that I was asking in terms of how they think about selling and how they have sold in the past. And so I was able to bridge the gap between the fact that they didn't have SaaS, but I knew that with a combination of the skill set, but also the potential I could see, that they were going to thrive in this role. And so I am a really big fan of hiring completely outside of SaaS at times, because I feel like you bring diversity in and you bring a different lens, and that strengthens the team. I have some sellers in my team that are in their 50s that haven't sold in SaaS before, but they are lifelong sellers and they know how to forge relationships with people. And that experience is what's missing sometimes in people who are a little bit less tenured, but have had SaaS experience. So the transfer and the crossover of knowledge is incredible to watch, like upskilling on both ends, from a technical side to a sort of more deeper soft skills, power skills side. And then you just see the whole team flourish as a result. So yeah, big fan of thinking outside the box and focusing on skills. And I think about that to anyone looking at their career as well and looking at their next move, maybe in the job market right now. Be careful about boxing yourself into titles, because if you box yourself into titles, you're probably missing out on a whole raft of opportunity where you couldn't have imagined that your career could go into that path just by focusing on skills and what skills you want, what skills you have, and what skills you want to develop.
So what kind of tactical tips then would you give? Like, let's go to the businesses for a second. So businesses that are maybe struggling to hire folks that have that value set or see things like that, right? What have you seen that's worked, or what advice would you give these companies to find these gems or to be able to get this information out in interview? What would be your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different for every role. You've got to curate a really thoughtful set of questions and be purposeful in what you're testing for. So I always ask a question on grit. I always ask a question, because it's sales, on what is a deal you're most proud of. And in that process, I uncover whether they can prospect, how they dealt with adversity, because normally if you're proud of that deal, it's because it was challenging. whether they were able to have multiple relationships with different people and how they were able to bring them together in consensus. So just asking that one question, I get the whole sales cycle from beginning to end. And it's much better to ask a question like that than to ask, tell me how you prospect, tell me how you multi-thread. If you ask them about an actual deal scenario, you can tell firstly it's genuine, but also you uncover their process in the context of that question. I normally also ask about self-awareness and humility, and I'm probably giving away my question list here, but I always ask about a time that they've been disappointed in themselves. And because I feel like that hits really deep on values, and it tests for a few things. It tells me what their values are, but it also tells me whether they've got self-awareness and the ability to learn from mistakes and be vulnerable and share that, or whether they're not willing to do that and therefore probably a little bit more closed to learning. And the reason that I focus on that so much is because I feel like today when you're hiring, we're constantly upskilling and learning. And so if you're closed to new things and closed to learning experiences, you're probably not going to thrive in an environment that's really fast-paced. So they're the kinds of things I think of, but my suggestion would be to think about your own must-haves in the role. For me, it's resilience, self-awareness, and a sales acumen of some sort. That whatever it is you're hiring for, you can test for it in different ways. And so think about the questions that you'd want to do that with without being too prescriptive.
What advice would you give someone that's sitting there and maybe, well, we can talk about AI in a second, but let's say they're looking at their profession, they're not sure what to do next, they're looking for a new role. What advice would you give them to prosecute and understand what they're actually looking for and how to find that role?
Yeah, and it's an interesting time because we would have seen, and you probably would see from your role in the market, that we're in the big stay right now, which is people are staying in their roles because we're in a little bit of a downturn economically. But we've just done a survey with LinkedIn a couple of months ago where it says that 76% of Australians are looking to change roles by the end of the year. And so I suppose my headline to anyone looking for a role right now who's getting a bit frustrated with the lack of opportunity, there's going to be a huge reshuffle, firstly. So keep your eyes out towards sort of the second half of the year because people are going to start changing roles as they get more confidence in the economy. That's when you see people move around a little bit more. So that's the first thing. But I've always found that when you're looking for a role, an intense focus and clarity on what you want is where you'll see the biggest payoff. And what I mean by that is just what we talked about. Break down a role into skills. So look at it as a set of skills, not a title. And that's going to help define what opportunity looks like for you. And then I personally ask myself 4 questions. The first is, what is a must-have for you? What is your non-negotiable? So I'm a mother of 3. My non-negotiable might be I need a little bit of flexibility to be able to pick up my children from school or daycare. My husband's a pilot. He flies a lot. I absolutely have to have that in a role. But it could be salary. It could be variety. It could be intensity. There are so many things that people look for when they're looking for jobs. So have a very clear idea of what is a non-negotiable for you, and then do the flip side. What is something that would turn you off, that would have you hating your day job because it exists within it? That could be something like repetitiveness, or it could be that it's high pressure, in which case don't go into sales. Some people love that and they put that in their must have. So have a very clear idea of what you must have, what you can't have, and then what you are great at. What's your skill set that is really honed, that you have, developed over many years, that that you can bring to a role with confidence, and that is kind of like your subject matter expertise that you would sell yourself on. And lastly, no one will change roles just to do the same job, because you'll find that you'll get very bored very quickly. So having an idea of what you want to develop as a skill set to stretch into that you don't already have. So I honestly recommend having a list of your top 4 skills that you would want. I did this a couple of years ago when I was looking to get into second line management. And that was literally the skill, was I want to know how to manage managers. And so when I was talking internally with LinkedIn about stretching me in my current role, I had a very clear understanding of what I wanted next. And they were luckily able to facilitate that in my current role. So if you have clarity on what you think is a skill set you need to develop to diversify yourself, to future-proof yourself for the workforce, then you've got this amazing matrix that you can overlay onto every job opportunity. And if it doesn't hit the mark in these 4 areas, then you can kind of throw it to the side because it's not going to serve you. Because I think what happens is people get job offers and it's shiny and it's new and you consider it, you're trying to make yourself fit into it because it's just something that's a bit different and maybe you're looking for a change. But having a little bit more direction and purpose in what you're trying to do and what you want to achieve is going to give you, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to consider roles. And you'll find that your transferable skills, well, if you think of it through that lens, it'll open up roles that you never expected to even go for, ever. Because we're going to have many career changes in our lifetime just at the rate of change that is happening in the job market. So it just it broadens your horizons, I suppose, but it gives you a lot of focus in the same time.
It's very similar to the conversations I have with candidates. When you ask them, what are you looking for in your next role? They'll knock out these generic answers. Then when you say what is truly important, take a blank piece of paper. What are the top things that you're putting on there straight away? And then also, what are the areas that you're not that strong in, or there's that gap that you're aiming up? There's always going to be an angle of aiming up to a role. So it could be you're a subject matter expert. So the sales example is perfect. They're an awesome salesperson, but they're aiming up to move into software sales. They want to understand the SaaS world. That's the perfect combination because you get a lot of trust from the person. You get a lot of loyalty because you've brought them into an industry they might not know, but they've brought all those skills with them. And it reminds me of a conversation Dan and I had a few weeks ago. Dan's got a very similar philosophy around hiring engineers. It's not particular stacks or a tech focus. It's more on these soft skills and ability to learn.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You're stretching to role. And if you stretch to role, it takes you a year to even understand the context in which you're operating in. Firstly, when you change, especially if you change companies, you're learning all sorts of things like I did: culture, product set, systems, etc. And then in the second year, you're trying to get some wins and find your feet. And then by the third year, you're probably feeling like you're having a huge impact. And then you enjoy that for a couple more years. I mean, you look at the tenure that you stay in a role when you're stretching to it. It's a lot greater. And that's great for companies. It's great for you. It's really a win-win for everyone, I think. Whereas if you're just plonking, and I would say this on the hiring side as well, be wary of plonking someone in who's got the exact skill set that you want, because you'll probably find as human beings, we get bored and you'll lose them within a year, 18 months, they'll go because they're not developing and they're not growing as an individual or a professional.
Key driver for people moving roles is feeling valuable or feeling valued. Are they actually making an impact or doing work that's stretching them? And that goes at all levels. So I think it's super important that you're always thinking about where can I develop? Where can I get better? And I think candidates love that too. That's what I do when I'm talking to candidates, really understanding, what are you amazing at? What are your areas of development? Can this company level you up as well as you level them up? If you can, that's like the dream. That's at least a few years of working with each other and leveling each other up. So it's something that I'm really passionate about too. If we pivot to a brand new topic, which I know you have a lot to say about and have a very optimistic approach on. So the world of, I wonder if you can guess what's coming up here. The world of AI.
Generative AI. Yeah, I thought you were going to talk about that. Yes. Look, it is the topic du jour, isn't it? It's everywhere. It seeps its way into nearly every conversation, I think, but that is because it is highly disruptive and it is all encompassing. And to me, it's extremely exciting, but I know that's not necessarily how people feel towards it right now. To take a step back, I remember, so we're a Microsoft shop. LinkedIn are owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft are heavy investors in OpenAI. So obviously we're quite au fait with generative AI. Have thought about it in a very thoughtful manner and a responsible manner as well. But I remember presenting on it late last year as we started to incorporate elements of it within our product in sales solutions at LinkedIn. And I pulled up 3 quotes from history. One was on the telephone one was on the Industrial Revolution, and the other was on the personal computer. And all of these quotes by pretty prominent, famous people talked about it in the sense of doom, gloom, or dismissive, all of them. And of course, I think the reason for that is it's very hard to project forward something that we don't fully understand. And something that is intrinsically disruptive, like the telephone, I don't think anyone would have been able to foresee that simple invention would have led to a telco company like Telstra and the diverse offerings that they have today. It's almost impossible to be able to project that into the future. But I think the point is that we don't know what industries or jobs or how it's going to evolve or emerge as a result of the introduction of technology. And I would say it's the same with generative AI, but I guarantee you that organically there's going to be new sectors, new skills, new jobs that are going to emerge off the back of this that we just can't see yet. And there's stories of those sort of coming out now with people using it, where in fact, the exact opposite of what people think, which I'll just plainly state it, people think it's going to reduce the amount of jobs out there, that their job's going to be replaced. We're actually having stories from clients where it's the opposite in many instances. So I would be careful about thinking in a doom and gloom way, as we have done in the past many times, because we've seen it tried and tested and proven that these new technologies normally do end up springing forth new industries and new roles and new jobs that we just don't have the capacity to imagine yet, because it's so far beyond what we know.
I totally agree with that. I think the pattern of history shows us that in so many cases it creates jobs, it creates opportunities for people. I guess it is scary. I went through the tour of the Toyota car manufacturing plant in Melbourne as they were kind of going through the transition of shutting it down. It was just before, and they had a system set up for people where they were helping the staff looking at what are they going to do next, reskilling, looking at different opportunities, actually looking at their skill sets and going, where can they be applied in other areas. So it is kind of scary, I guess, when you're faced with that situation, or you feel like it's under threat. But I do agree with you. I think looking at history, there's so much, like, my job didn't exist. I don't know how far back we should go, maybe 50 years, right? Something like that. My job didn't exist then. So now it does. And I kind of see the same thing. I think it's interesting, actually. When people ask me, oh, what do you think's happening? And if you say you don't know, people don't seem satisfied with that answer. They kind of want to know, where's this AI thing going? What's it going to be doing? But I don't think it's really hard to do that. I kind of look at it and go, I don't know. I think a whole bunch of things are going to change, similar to what you're saying, but we don't really know where it's going to lead.
We do have a point of view on it. So I'm actually extremely excited by this. I think about education as an example, which is under-resourced in many instances. We hear about the burden on teachers, and I think about the application to individualizing teaching experiences for students and what it could do. And it excites me because you think about the fact that now everyone's going to get a curated experience to their own learning style, which is really going to elevate how they learn and what they get out of it. So I actually think I think in an industry like that I'm not a specialist in, but I've been thinking about a lot in terms of how amazing it could be in terms of the disruption there in a positive way. But I also think over the years, we have learned to do tasks that we are not particularly good at because we are trying to be more data-driven in our business. So when you think about when Excel came out and plugging in number after number after number and having to analyze that, we're trying to get good at tasks that the human brain isn't really geared towards, which is limitless memory and ability to analyze vast amounts of data. There are limitations to our abilities here. And to be honest, it creates a bit of a time gap from a productivity standpoint when you're sinking yourself into something that you're not naturally good at, that's pretty laborious and low cognitive in terms of its load on your brain. But the human brain is incredibly complex. And so where I see generative AI sort of taking a place is replacing those tasks that we hate doing, that we're not good at, that are really laborious, that anyone could do in terms of the cognitive load. And then that allows us to rotate out of those and rotate into what we're really good at, which is the ability to contextualize, to create and assess and apply critical thinking, to ask questions, to be creative, to problem solve. We're going to rotate out of these boring tasks and into these more fun, relationship-centric, human-centric kind of strengths. And so when you think about it that way, how much better is your job going to be? Now, what it means is if you assess from a skills lens, a large percentage of your skills will be augmented by generative AI. Some may be replaced. And if you're highly vulnerable to replacement, then you probably need to be thinking now, what is the skill that I want to develop in my next role, or how can I upskill myself to be more relevant to the workforce? But in the large majority of cases, it's going to augment what we do and allow us to lean into the things that we love doing, and that are really more natural to us as human beings and what we're really strong at. I personally see it being used that way. Now, of course, there's going to be the flip side where some leaders or some companies are going to use it in a way that is automated and in a way that is attempting to build relationships at mass scale, or, in a way that's probably not as intuitive as what I just described. But I think that's probably ultimately going to fail, because the need for a human connection and the need to contextualize when you're outreaching to people, it's too great now. The expectation for hyper-personalization is too great. So if you're trying to use it to replace, for example, salespeople, you're probably going to find that it's quite fruitless because of the amount of complexity in relationship building that is needed that generative AI cannot possibly replace right now.
Yeah, I feel the same way about it, actually.
I think the creativity aspect, like when I think about it, I don't think, how can this do my job? I think, how can I do my job better? And this enables me to do it. And instead of like sales as an example, you see a lot of companies and they maybe use it as a top of funnel. So it's like trying to reach as many people as possible to try and drive their sales strategy or whatever. But I'm assuming what you're saying is use it a lot more thoughtfully and understand that when it makes things more efficient or helps with admin, the things that maybe classically salespeople and any people aren't great at, but turbocharges the aspects that you are great at, the personalization, the relationships, the human contact. So there's a human in the loop at all times, but you're using it to supercharge your business, I suppose.
Yeah, classic example of that. Think about the CRM. It's such a burden to salespeople to enter in data into the CRM. But when you've got recording software that summarizes what a call, what the main points are, what you need to do next, and you can just plonk that into your CRM, log the call, it's serving its purpose in terms of being a record of history, but it's also directing you to what you need to focus on and what you have to do next. How much more efficient is that, and how much better is it that you're spending your time actually actioning what you need to be doing rather than documenting or being out or doing data entry, essentially. So I think of that as like one example where it's going to really deburden people in terms of the time pressure they're under and allow them to lean into the things that really matter the most. And I think around that top of the funnel sort of spray and pray approach, volume is not the game now. It hasn't been the game for a long time, but I think generationally speaking, it's also even less so, because you're talking about a whole raft of people coming through the workforce now that are either digital natives or they became digitally native in their formative years, and they're shaped by the consumer world in terms of the expectation of personalization. And so even if you were trying to use something like Gen AI to spray and pray from a volume perspective, you're not going to get that depth that is required to cut through the noise digitally, and you're just going to be part of the spam, essentially. And so I think we were talking about this the other day, Chris, in terms of what people trust most are relationships, and that vouching system that has, been in place since the dawn of time in terms of, there's certainty around your relationship and who you can trust as a person. That's where you're going to see people rotate even more into. So what we're calling power skills, or what some people call soft skills, they're going to become equally as important as the technical skills that you need to keep up to date with, like Gen AI as well.
What would be some examples, whether it be LinkedIn or some businesses you've seen that is using this application, using AI to positively impact the business? Like, what's some of the best examples that you've seen?
Yeah, I can think of one immediate one. And by the way, AI has always been part of the platform. I think AI has sort of been around since the 50s and 60s. They were sort of experimenting with it and putting it into processes and products. But in terms of generative AI, we have something in our product called Account IQ. And what it does is it takes what would normally be 7 hours worth of reading of annual reports and newspaper articles and bits and pieces that you've got on companies and summarizing it into something that will take you 7 seconds to read about how does that company make money? What are their pressures? What is the competitive landscape like? What are they trying to achieve in terms of their strategy, their top 3 strategic initiatives? Who are the key players in that company, the leadership that's within there that are talking about certain topics? And then what are those topics? And that all comes in front of you in a matter of seconds, when normally I would be knee deep in an annual report trying to find one name to then speak to then try and understand what does that company do and how I can add value to them as a salesperson. So that's just one example of where I think it's doing a great thing in terms of efficiency and relevancy. And there's value on both ends there. There's a time saving from the rep, but there's more relevancy to the client as well.
Yeah, that's unbelievable how it can condense that amount of information down and then just give you the key points that would have taken how long the last time, and you would lose things through human error or forget stuff, right? Whereas if it's got the right context base, knows what it's looking for, then it starts to kind of learn and you educate it over time as well. So the model just gets better and better, right? I can imagine the application for LinkedIn is huge because you have so much data.
That's it. And I think the other thing to consider, and I suppose a lot of people out there might be thinking about investing in generative AI tools and offerings. And I think the 2 questions that I learnt from our head of engineering, who's been in AI for many, 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 many years, was you need to ask, where is the data coming from, like the quality of the data? And so to your point, LinkedIn data is first party. That is people telling you about themselves. So you can't get more truer or cleaner than that in many instances. So what is the quality of data that's going into the model? And then the second is, how are you investing in fine-tuning that model? So sometimes it will spit out things that are incorrect, that are biased. You need to make sure that you are fine-tuning and correcting what is happening within the model. And so there are 2 questions to ask anyone who's kind of selling to you right now on a generative AI offering, because it'll give you a very good understanding of how valuable it's going to be to you. If the data is no good, the offering won't be good. If they're not fine-tuning the model, then it's not learning from what is the appropriate response versus what is an incorrect response. And so, there's going to be worlds between in terms of offerings there. But yeah, very confident that at least at LinkedIn, we are being responsible with our application of it and making sure we are fine-tuning that model and putting a lot of resources into it.
I've found the same thing so my day job is CTO at Homes, which is like in real estate, and that has a lot of data as well. I've found, like, we've talked about different ideas. Maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. What kind of doors does AI open for us or for our customers? But I think the most effective, at least for now, is kind of going, we have so much data about real estate properties, and maybe we can analyze all of that for people, make some kind of searchable metadata type thing where you can actually drive like a Web 2.0 search type thing, but you can use AI to help drive a lot of the improvements where you can get more power over, knowing more about what this data set is giving you, or search through it, or, be able to cut a whole bunch of time out of doing research. That seems to be, right now anyway, like really effective. It gives a whole new perspective on it.
I think a lot of people out there have a huge data set that they've collected from their own clients or their own customers. And data is the new oil. We always talk about that, but the ability to get insights out of it and use it to good purpose is where I think the promise of Gen AI lies. And so to your point, if it's a better consumer experience, or if you can create a Web 2.0, which is really hugely valuable for your users, I think that's really where the value does lie, and being able to actually use that data to purpose, because I think we have had an overwhelming amount of data that has been generated over the last 10 or 15 years as it's been a focus of business, and finally we can use that to good purpose.
Yeah, fantastic. I know there was something else that we wanted to discuss, Alana, something that you're really passionate about, and again, pivoting again back into the workforce side, but You spoke a bit about the data and what you see from companies at the moment. So there's companies worried about remote versus hybrid and what works and what doesn't work and how do we keep our culture. And I know you wrote a really great article on this. Would you share a little bit about why that's important to you, and then we can sort of talk about maybe some tips and strategies for companies and folks listening?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and this is really the remote work, hybrid, in-office divide that is occurring right now. And we know at LinkedIn there is a preference for employees to bring people back to the office. But we also know on the flip side, there is a preference, particularly among women and younger workers, to be more remote. So we have this kind of conflict between employers and employees. And I think there's benefit on both sides. Obviously, in the employer's mind, what is top of mind for them is how does the physical environment, like the office, shape your culture? And they're probably thinking that things like retention and connectedness to your fellow worker is really important. It plays into how long people stay at a company and how much value they get out of that company. And then on the flip side, you've got people who are like, well, I need to balance my work and my life. COVID has opened up this whole opportunity around hybrid working that I don't think you can put back into the box now. And so I have a preference for remote working or hybrid working. And so I suppose the thing I think about there is the people who are really promoting or wanting remote work, being women and a lot of younger workers, it's kind of like a double-edged sword in many ways, because I do wonder whether we're doing a disservice to people allowing fully remote when they haven't had the chance to build their own careers and their networks. And we know networking is such a huge part of being able to navigate your career and get value out of your career. And so when you don't have established networks and you don't have established connections and you're really just doing your job for the sake of doing your job, I do think it becomes very difficult to give those people promotional opportunities or even have visibility into what they're doing half the time, because we know that as humans, we intuitively value the contributions that we see rather than those that we don't. Even if the ones that we don't are substantially greater, there is a bias there that you're fighting against. And I wrote this article because I wrote it from a leadership lens, which is we should enable hybrid ways of working. And if we do have a remote workforce, we need to be cognizant that we're not going to see them as much. They're not going to be as visible. And so we have to work really hard to make sure that we understand the contributions they're making and give them access to network and promotional opportunities as a result of that, because otherwise they'll kind of be forgotten in many instances just due to human nature and cognitive bias.
That's an amazing point. It's kind of going back to the old school days, right? The person who's like in first in the morning and out last at night, you earn your stripes and you must be working harder than everyone else, right? But it might be that 4 or 5 of those hours, you're not actually doing that much.
Yeah, it's I'm definitely not a fan of staying in the office until late at night or proving your worth through the long hours that you're doing. I think if you can do your task and you can do it well and you can do it in a timely manner, there is trust there between an employer and employee. But what I do think that is what I'm worried about, I suppose, is especially if you are coming into a company fresh or you're younger, is all those transferred knowledge moments, those water cooler moments that you don't get if you are outside of the office, which is like I see it on the floor all the time out there, where it's just a quick question and an answer, and you learn so much through just those informal kind of communication moments. And I think, Chris, you were talking about even exposure to leadership, where you get just a couple of minutes of their time over a week, which could amount to 40 minutes in a week. When would you ever get, a 40-minute meeting with your MD? So there is benefit to being around people in terms of sharing experiences and learning. And that does accelerate your ability to ramp in role and your ability to contribute, but it accelerates your relationships, which are enduring. And they last well beyond whether you stay at the company or not. You collect them as you go, and they help you invaluably in terms of navigating your career in the future. So I do think there's a lot there for coming into the office, though I completely understand the benefit and like the appeal of fully remote at the same time. And I suppose you just have to be conscious of the trade-off that is being made there.
Yeah, I think it also depends if the company is remote first or if the company is hybrid, or in office, but there's some members who are remote, particularly leadership or folks who, even just from a practical perspective, like what is the temperature in the office today? Like the boss looks like he's having a hard day. I won't ask him this question. Versus you don't know, you send a Slack message or whatever, and you've read the whole situation completely wrong, as opposed to you would just have not said anything, right? And I think what I'm seeing too is a huge shift back to the in-person stuff, or certainly hybrid, just from like younger folks or less experienced people that want to get that, like you said, the learning by proxy. Like some of the best things I ever learned was what not to do. Like that probably wasn't a great outcome. Like made a mistake there, but you quickly forget about it. You don't sit and ruminate on it if you're sitting at home, or I should have did that better, and then you're like half an hour down a rabbit hole. Versus if your colleague was there, you'd be like, don't worry about it. Go grab a coffee or something and forget about
You're
it.
so
You know,
right. It's that isolation, that you live in your own world and your own brain for too long, and you think you've misread context and tone and everything like that can happen when you're kind of remoting in, and you've got no one to bounce ideas off or to try and sort of get an assessment as to whether you did something truly wrong or whether it was okay. You're right. Like you miss that that ability to assess like what has happened and whether it was truly as impactful as you think it was. I completely agree.
It's also really nice. Dan and I had a laugh about this. It's also really nice to know when you have a bad idea and you're not like a few days down thinking, I've got the best idea ever. I can't wait to do this. And you tell someone, they're like, that's a terrible idea.
That contextual reading of faces when you're saying it out loud is kind of important, isn't it? Yeah, you're correct. I think, look, there's obviously the beauty is a marriage of both worlds, I think. And as I said, I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle around flexibility. And I do disconnect flexibility to remote because we all have responsibilities and things that we need to do. And we all enjoyed the ability to put a load of washing on in the middle of the day and not have to worry about it running overnight. Or we all enjoyed being able to nip down the road, pick up the kids, come back online later on and finish off what you're doing. I think everyone now understands that there is a way to work that isn't just the 9 to 5. But so the best of both worlds is being able to enable that flexibility, but also have that time in the office to connect. So you asked me about what you can do as a leader. You know, as a leader, I think you got to talk about the issue purposefully. So call it out. Especially if you think your remote workers are being disadvantaged, you know, talking about it and trying to safeguard any negative impact to remote work is really important as a leader. Practicing inclusive team building, so making sure that you are connecting your team, whether they are remote or not, regularly, I think will sort of safeguard against it as well. And then facilitating networking, because to my earlier point, I do think that's the biggest unseen deficit, is not being able to build relationships within companies. So being a facilitator of connecting people in a networking manner, I think would really alleviate that negative consequence of remote working at times. Even introducing something like a formal sponsorship program where someone who is very connected can navigate you through the company, and you are connecting maybe a less tenured worker to a more tenured worker. To your point earlier, you know, I don't think it matters as much if you are in senior leadership and you work remote, because you have established a career in a network already. Where it does impact negatively is your ability to transfer that knowledge onto people who are only just starting out their careers. And so it becomes a bit more of a selfless act there by coming into the office and helping contribute to the culture of the company and contribute to your people. And then the last thing is probably, as a leader, just making sure you're taking regular temperature checks, like how is it going? Are there any negative impacts that I'm not aware of? You know, being able to survey your people and ask them on this topic, I think is really important. But it's not all on the leader. You know, if you are a remote worker, you can do a lot of the flip side yourself. You know, you can find people to sponsor you purposefully. You know, find someone who's been around for a long time that can connect you to others in the company. I know in Australia we don't like to promote our work in terms of tall poppy syndrome, but promoting your work to others where they learn from it and where they can scale it and where it's helpful to them is not self-promotion. It's you adding value to others. And I think if you are remotely working, you it's incredibly important to do that because you're showcasing your skill set that you've honed and your contribution to the company where normally you wouldn't be seen. And it's a way to be seen. So I think that's really important. And then something that kind of connects us right to the beginning is just to be really purposeful with your career plan. And so that you don't get left behind when it comes to promotion opportunities. You have a very clear view of what you want to be going for internally within your company. And you can voice that with your managers, and then they have an understanding of what you're aiming towards. I think that'll help alleviate that visibility bias or the proximity bias that we're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. So to finish things up, Alana, what I would like to ask you is, what are you most excited about, and what should people listening be most excited about, do you think?
Look, I'm really excited about the opportunity with generative AI. I honestly think that it's going to open up a whole raft of opportunity. It's going to be an equalizer to many people. Again, bring back that education example. Think about accessibility and what that will do for the general population, to people who maybe haven't had as much accessibility to education. I think that it's just, the future is so bright when it comes to that. So I'm excited about that. I like the fact that careers are moving fast in terms of skill set. And I think that if I was going to give one takeaway to anyone listening, it would be to make sure that you foster a love of lifelong learning, because your career is going to change so much. Even if you're in the same job in 4 or 5 years, your job as it stands is going to change dramatically. And so that change, I feel, is really exciting, because it just means that, it's never going to be a dull moment for us as workers going forward. We're always going to be changing, learning, evolving, being stimulated, and opening up career possibilities that we never thought were imaginable to our parents or our grandparents. It's a great time to be working. So that excites me.
Yeah, it really is. I was going to ask you for a wee live musical performance, but let's do that next time.
No chance.
We'll get Dan on the guitar and a couple of instruments. We'll get you singing. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and have a chat with Dan and I. And really appreciate you taking the time.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.